I fell back, my knees banging the dumper, the red after-image of the lighter's flame pulsing before my eyes. I froze in a crouch. Then I blundered away, charging back down the gap between the wall and the dumper. Weeds grabbed my legs. The wall grazed my cheek. The dumper pressed in, and something sticking out from the wall jabbed at my thigh. With a gasp of relief, I squeezed through. I staggered ahead, then stepped on something, the top of a trash can, and my ankle turned under me. Falling to one knee, I reached down and touched the cold ground and steadied myself. And then I remembered those men with the laundry bags and understood what they'd contained, and with all the ease of a child, I was sick. For a moment, I closed my eyes against the horror. I opened them slowly. Vomit steamed around my feet. It didn't happen to you. It's all right. Catching my breath, I found an old end of Kleenex and wiped my mouth, pulled myself upright. My ankle was throbbing, my knee ached. There was a stinging scrape along the side of my face. I swore under my breath, "It's all right, take it easy." I peered around the corner of the garage. Night uncoiled down the street. Windows glowed like cat's eyes, and I could hear the buzz of a street lamp, but I couldn't see anyone, so I forced my legs to move. Across the asphalt apron of the garage, the sidewalk, left. "It's all right, don't run." The corner, left, one more time. I made it to the car and got in, and then I couldn't stop myself and locked all the doors as if that headless corpse might follow me here. As I stared into the darkness, my reflection mistily drifted over the window. Lights were on in the houses, but no one was out in the street. In the distance, I could hear the low gear grunt of a truck. The wind coming up stronger bumped at the car. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly. 5 minutes, I thought, maybe less. I'd come that close to seeing a murder, maybe being murdered myself. In delayed response, my heart began to race in my chest, and I felt faint. With shaking hands, I fumbled a cigarette up to my mouth. I tried to start thinking. Who was he? Who had killed him? Why? Who, except you, knew he was going to be there? But then I got a hold of myself and shut down my mind. There was no point asking questions no one could answer. There was no time for theory, no time for abstractions. Are you in danger? It was the only question that counted, and the answer was no, not now, not here. Proof. Whoever had killed him hadn't waited, which must mean that they hadn't known I'd be coming. Or maybe they didn't care. Something personal, something you wouldn't want a policeman to hear. Maybe that had all been a lie. Maybe it had nothing to do with me at all. So what do I do? Should I? No. No big decisions. Just get out of there. Right now, you couldn't think your way out of a wet paper bag. With relief and a vicious twist of the key, I started the car. Truth. I didn't want to think or question or know. I only wanted to get away from this spot. But like a careful drunk, I made myself do it slowly. I turned away from the curb. Straightened out, lightly put my foot down, and maybe that's why I saw it. As I came up to the next corner, I stopped the car dead. I twisted back in my seat. Behind me, stretching along the curb, were the half-dozen cars that had been parked in front of me. They were all rusted, dented heaps, held together by body compound and inertia. Except for one, that is, a late-model Pontiac as bright and shiny as the one I was driving. I thought for a second, then clunked the car into reverse, the engine whining shrilly as I backed down the street. I stopped. Quickly opening the door, I walked back to the other car. I leaned forward, cupping my hands, and peered into the driver's side window. It was a standard-issue two-door sedan, auto transmission, plush velour seats, the dash neatly wiped. I didn't have to see the Hertz litter bag to know it was rented. I tried the doors. They were locked. It was obvious, though. He'd done just as I had, parked here, then approached the garage circumspectly, though not circumspectly enough. For some reason, this little discovery steadied me, and by the time I was back in my own car, I felt more under control. Doubling back to the Chrysler Freeway, I followed the rush-hour traffic north, but got off before Flint. Then I just drove around for a while. Bit by bit, my nerve came back, and as I drove along a cluttered neon boulevard of car lots and muffler shops, I realized I was hungry. I pulled into a McDonald's and used their washroom to clean up a little, but restoring myself to respectability killed my appetite for their kind of food, and I drove further down the street to a shopping center. What I found there wasn't much better, something called The Chances Are, a bar with a Western motif, saloon doors, waitresses in cowboy hats, wagon wheels hanging from the ceiling with lights in the hub. I took a stool and ordered a bourbon, cheap and disgusting enough to jolt you out of anything. But the steak sandwich wasn't too bad. By then my mind was more or less back on the rails, and with coffee and cigarettes I tried to work out where I stood. Point 1. There was no reason to panic. The man who had called me, assuming he was the man in the dumper, had known I was involved in all this, but whoever had killed him probably didn't, or didn't care if I was. Otherwise they would have hung around and killed me as well. Point 2. I didn't want to go to the police, at least for the moment. Something personal, something you wouldn't want a policeman to hear. That was part of it. And maybe after my panicky flight from the garage, I wanted to recoup my self-esteem, at least in my own eyes. I'd come this far on my own. I could go a bit further. Which was why, when I'd finished eating, I walked through the plaza until I found a hardware store that was still open and bought a 5-pound sledge. It was after 7 now. Back on the freeway heading south, traffic was thin. I was only 10 minutes getting down to Hamtramck, though it took another 20 to find Grayson Street again. Nothing had changed. Passing the garage, I saw it was as dark and calm as I had left it. But there was no reason why it shouldn't be. They might not find the body for months. They might never find it. I turned down a side street and parked about 3 cars ahead of the Pontiac. Headlights off, motor running. I leaned back to switch off the interior light, then eased open the door. The cold wind struck my eyes. That acrid chemical smell burned in my nose. I shut the door carefully, leaving it open a crack, then walked back down the street. I was heading toward Grayson, and now a car passed there, its lights sweeping the corner. I stopped, undecided, almost went back, but as it passed further on, I went forward again. Standing by the Pontiac, I swiveled around. It was parked right in front of a house, where the lights were on, but the place next door was dark. I drew back the sledge and swung as hard as I could. At the first blow, the window only gave slightly in its frame and didn't even crack, but the second starred it like a piece of old ice, and the third pushed a big chunk inside the car. With my hand, I pushed more bits and pieces away, then reached in and opened the glove compartment and found what I wanted. The rental form. I pulled it out and walked smartly back to my car. No one had seen me. 2 minutes later, I was back on the freeway. I headed south and this time went right downtown before pulling off. Then I parked and read through the form in the glow of the dash light. His name had been Michael Travin. He had a Maine driver's license that gave a home address in Lewiston. The car had been rented from the Hertz counter in the Renaissance Center, and the local address was room 909 in the Detroit Plaza Hotel, the hotel that's part of the complex. Hertz had imprinted his Visa card. He'd paid $3 for extra insurance. Decision time, but not really. I found Michigan Avenue, followed it straight down to Randolph, and that took me right into the center. I parked in the same lot where I'd left Brightman's Jaguar. This cold, dusty wind was fierce off the river. As I walked up, the towers glowed like copper against the night sky. I went in by the main entrance and found the hotel desk right in front of me, but I walked around for a moment, getting my bearings. The place was like something left over from a sci-fi spectacular. The main lobby was a brightly lit, 5-story atrium where trees breathed the man-made air, fountains splashed into artificial lakes, and concrete seating pods projected out into space. Impressive enough, and security was probably better than normal, but the place was very big, very busy, and despite everything, I still looked very respectable. Smile! Hi, I'm Mr. Travin, in 909. I can't find my key, so I must have left it with you. I hope. Smile. Just a yes, Mr. Travin, you did. Here you are. Thanks. I strode firmly away from the desk, but then blundered about, not sure which way to go, for a network of circular stairs and escalators wound you round to various levels inside the lobby. It was that kind of place. Eventually, however, I followed a bellhop into an elevator, which then shot me up to the guest rooms. Emerging, I found myself in an empty, curved hall. I followed this around. The door to 909 was like any other door in any other hotel. I hesitated a moment and almost knocked, then just inserted the key and went in. At once, instinctively, I knew that the room was empty. I flipped on a light. I was in a little hall, the bathroom on my right. I stuck my head in, neat, tidy. The towels weren't fresh, but they were neatly hung up. The shower was one of those molded plastic units, not up to the standards of the lobby, and there were a few drops of water around the drain, but nothing more. I backed out, then stepped into the main part of the room. This, too, was nothing more than a standard first-class American hotel room. There was a desk bureau with a mirror and a wicker chair, a TV set on a plastic pedestal, a tub chair covered in vinyl, and then the bed, a single, with a night table and a lamp. Even the room's only picture was standard, an abstract that could have been taken from any doctor's office, New York to Los Angeles. Standard, empty, barren, and no sign of Michael Traven at all. I looked everywhere, not that there were many places to look. There were no bags, no clothes in the bureau or closet, and the room was so neat you would have thought the maid had just finished. The bed was made, ashtrays were clean, the wastebasket was empty. I turned on the television. It was tuned to one of the Canadian stations in Windsor. I pulled back the drapes. There were no messages scrawled on the windows, and the lights of the city winked up at me dumbly. I lit a cigarette, took a drag. The room was so neat and tidy that you'd think he'd checked out, but he hadn't. Otherwise I wouldn't have been able to get the key in his name. And a maid, I realized, hadn't done this. The towels were hung up, but they hadn't been changed. And though the ashtrays were clean, there were no fresh matchbooks. What had happened? By now, a peculiar feeling came over me. I don't know how to describe it, a creepy, paranoid prickling at the back of my neck. I hadn't felt it in years, not since I'd lived in the USSR. And then I knew what it was, and I spun right around and began searching again, searching now for the signs of a search that would have been made so carefully that even if you did find traces of it, you wouldn't be sure. Not quite, not ever. On my hands and knees, I felt along the edge of the carpet, and yes, it was loose. If I pulled it back here, I could take up the whole room. Had the contractor been sloppy, or had somebody lifted it? Then I traced out the seams in the wallpaper, feeling along with my fingernail. Loose again. Natural wear, or had someone been using a razor? I turned the chairs upside down, pulled out the bureau and the bed, checked the TV, and found 3 screws that might have been freshly scratched. They'd been looking for something small, I thought, some sort of paper or document, or maybe not. When I turned over the mattress, I found a 6-inch cut where they'd slipped in their probe. But whatever they'd been looking for, I was now certain of one thing. CIA, SIS, SDECE, STASI, BND, security everywhere leaves the same mark. But there was only one source for the peculiar lingering scent I sniffed all through this room. KGB. Which didn't especially excite me. I was more accustomed to the comitet than I was to dead bodies, but I began to think fast. They, after all, must have moved very fast. At 4 o'clock, Traven calls me in the parking lot. Looking down, I could make out the booth. Was it even possible that he'd called from right here? No, he might have recognized Brightman's car from this height, but not me, and he'd known my name. We'd then set up our meeting. 5:30, that was. So sometime in the hour between 4 and 5 they'd picked him up and started following him. That had probably happened right here, for they would have had this room under surveillance, but in any event they'd followed him to Grayson Street. What had they thought he was doing there? Hiding something? Not likely. Surely there was only one thing they could have thought, that he was meeting someone. But that hadn't concerned them. I'd already worked that much out. What did interest them then? When you thought about it, all they'd really taken trouble about was his identity. They'd cut off his head, hands, and feet, so that establishing the identity of the corpse would now be a forensic miracle. But then they'd been very sloppy, for they'd forgotten the car, or had they known about it at all? If they'd followed him there, they must have, but they'd ignored it, and come here and searched the room instead, which might mean something. Maybe they already knew that the Traven identity was false, and that by itself it wouldn't help establish who the man actually was. Possible, but maybe not. For their differing reasons, both the Kremlin and the Pentagon find the notion of an all-powerful, super-efficient Soviet state very convenient and promoted. But for anyone who's ever lived in Russia, the idea is laughable, and the KGB's screwed up before. Using a Kleenex, I picked up the phone. "This is room 909, operator. I'd like to speak to information in Lewiston, Maine." "Yes, sir. That's a toll-free call, sir. Just one moment." She got off the line as the long-distance operator came on. "Information for what city, please?" "Lewiston, Maine." "Yes, go ahead." I pulled out the Hertz form, spelled Traven's name, and gave his address. After a moment she said, "We have no Traven listed there, sir." "Could it be a new listing, operator?" "No, sir, we have no listing at all." I hung up, but then had another idea. I called down to the desk. "I'd like to check out, if I could, Mr. Traven in 909. I'm in quite a hurry. Could you have someone bring up the bill?" "One moment, sir. Yes, that will be on your Visa card? Please, I think you already have it. Yes, Mr. Traven, I'll check it through and then someone will bring it up to your room." 10 minutes later, careful to hide my face, I stuck $1 around the door and received Traven's bill in return. But it wasn't very informative. Same address, same phone number, same Visa number as on the Hertz form. He'd had breakfast in his room every morning, 2 other meals in one of the hotel restaurants, and drinks in the bar. All in all, he'd been staying here for 6 days. Unfortunately, he'd made no long-distance phone calls, so the men who'd searched this room hadn't slipped up after all. The name Traven, his driver's license, the credit card, his hotel bill, they'd added up to a dead end. In a few days, Hertz would sound the alarm. The police would come up with the car, but then go no further. Even if they found the body and concluded it was Traven, it wouldn't do them much good. Michael Traven, whoever he was, had effectively vanished from the face of the earth. I took a long breath, walked over to the window, and looked out at the night. The lights of an ore carrier twinkled out on the river and made me think of Halifax. I'd been there yesterday. It seemed centuries ago. Brightman's death was a chasm, a great void, and what did it have to do with all this? "I can tell you everything, Mr. Thorne. How it was done, what has happened to Brightman, everything." Had Traven been killed because he knew? And was that why they hadn't worried about me, because as long as I didn't get to talk to him, I wouldn't know? But questions like that were beyond me, and I had more immediate problems. Where was I in this? What should I do now? I sensed that I'd reached a turning point emotionally in terms of my own commitment, but in other ways as well. There were some practical questions. I'm not a professional adventurer. As a writer, my time is my own. But there was the small matter of money and the more subtle one of energy. Did I really want to make the investment? Then there were legal considerations. Right now, my legal position was fine, not even iffy. I hadn't actually seen a crime committed, and you're under no obligation to report the dead bodies you find lying around. The car was nothing. As long as I paid Hertz for the window, no cop on earth would think of pressing a charge. Theft? I hadn't taken anything of value. Obstruction of justice? No one knew the rental form had been in the glove compartment except me. Besides, the police could get the original form from the Hertz office. No doubt I'd violated some local hotel and innkeeper's act by getting into this room, but even that might be hard to prove since I hadn't had a criminal purpose. What had I taken? Destroyed? No. If I picked the phone right now and called the police, I'd get nothing more than a lecture on good citizenships. But just then, there was a knock at the door. I froze. The knock, a little heavier, came again. I took a deep breath. Yes? "Mr. Traven, sir, valet service. They called up from the desk, sir, and said you was checking out. Don't want to be forgetting your suit." "Just a minute." I was even more careful than I'd been with the bellhop and made absolutely certain that the woman didn't get a look at my face. Traven was dead. I didn't want to become him, yet now in an odd way I was being visited by his shade. Pulling off the plastic wrapping, I spread the suit out on the bed, and it lay there in grisly imitation of its owner, sans head, hands, and feet. Other than this, however, it was perfectly ordinary. Gray, 1 pair of trousers, no vest. Sears, the men's store, said the label. But then I saw there was a little brown envelope twisted to the hanger. "We found this in your pockets." I tore it open, spilled it out on the pillow. 1 book of matches from something called the Mikado Room. 77 cents in change, including 1 Canadian quarter, and a claim check from a photo store. I picked up this last item. It was the usual thing, the strip of envelope they give back to you when you take in film. It was gray, overprinted with the number 2009 and the store's name and address, Jack's Photo Supplies, Berlin, NH. Well, maybe they'd screwed up after all. And right then I made up my mind. I wasn't entirely sure why. I'd been joining the dots in one of those puzzles they'd used to put in the paper, and here was another. That was part of it, and so was Russia, and all I felt about that country and May Brightman was still in it too. But there was something else, and it was something personal, just as Traven had said, a feeling present from the very beginning that all these events, however possible it seemed, led back to me. But maybe the reasons don't make any difference. A rose is a rose. You do what you do. With Traven's suit bundled under my arm, I took the elevator down to the lobby, and 45 minutes later, behind the wheel of Brightman's enormous white boat, I entered the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel and crossed back over the Canadian border.